Our world continues to change and push us in ways we have not been challenged before. On this show, we talk about these challenges, how to be aware of them, face them, and overcome them in your life. This is David Waldas, creator of the Aligned Living System.
And I'm Nick Musica, Aligned Living Coach. Welcome to the Aligned Living System podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Aligned Living System podcast. This is David Waldas here with Nick Musica. This week, our topic is about fulfillment, particularly in relation to spirituality, and desire and aversion, and how we use that to direct us through our lives and make the choices that we make. And so I think it's going to be a pretty interesting conversation, pretty eye-opening, because when we don't look at what our desires are and our aversions, obviously desires seem to be much easier for people to look at. But when we don't realize the role that aversions play in how we act, what we put our energy into, what we create, what we avoid, it controls us. And so, we're always seeking out what we desire, and we tend to avoid, our aversions, the things that don't feel as good to us. And so when we look at our spirituality, so often when people start down this path, they're looking for non-ordinary experiences, visitations, energetics, a lot of that elevated state of consciousness. And when it's seeking out, that desire for that, and we just keep going there and we create group gatherings where we come together and it just feels really beautiful and good, and we're seeking out the bliss aspect of it, it feels amazing for a while. But what always happens for people is they start to notice a lack of fulfillment, because they start to seek out these experiences that just feel good, but aren't connected to their human life. They're not connected to their purpose. They're not connected to the Dharma, why we're here, what we're showing up for, what we want to create, the impact that we want to have, what wants to come through us. And so, without that piece of knowing what our aversions are, pushing into them, creating more expansion and spaciousness for us to expand what we desire by working through our aversions, our life gets very limited if we're not doing that. And so when we stay in that smaller bubble, fulfillment, just gets further and further away the longer we spend there. And it's kind of counterintuitive, right? Because people are like, God, I feel so blissed out. Why do I not feel fulfilled? Why am I not really happy? How can I be blissful and not happy at the same time? And so it's like, I think it's a really important conversation for us to have, because people get stuck in it. And then, it's funny how many people I talk to that are like, oh my God, I feel so amazing. And they'll, whether they're sharing on social media or they're in these events, and then that night they're crying themselves to sleep by how miserable they are. And it just doesn't mesh up. And so if you're having that experience where you're like, I'm experiencing all this bliss, but I'm not happy. Why am I blissful and not happy? This is a good conversation. Yeah. How you doing, Nick?
I'm doing good. I'm doing okay. I'm trying to see where I am with the blissful unhappy as we're talking about this and what it all means to me. So I'm curious how you define the aversions. Like but let's talk about that, because like I'm wondering what's the benefit of diving into those things, and what do they mean, and why am I avoiding them to begin with?
Yeah. It's interesting. I was at this event last night, where I'm actually at my parents' house in upstate New York, which is an area where people tend to look for more complacency. They kind of settle into their life. There's not a lot of like seeking big growth. It's not that it doesn't happen here, but it's not really part of the culture. And we went to this event where there's this really incredible local singer, and it was like kind of a potluck at this barn behind a church. And so they do like weekly or monthly like concerts or whatever, and do a potluck, and then the singer sings. And so we went and we're sitting, like we walked in and all the tables in the back were taken, and all the seating on the side was taken, but the front was wide open, like right in front of the singer, right where where the best sound is, and so it sat in the front, and by the time the singer started, everything was filled except for kind of the front of the tables next to us too. So anything in the front row and back a little bit was open, and everybody else was kind of, settled into their spots in the
Mm,
shadows a little bit. And I was like, wow, I grew up here, right? And so I was like, I get that feeling of like wanting to kind of hide out, just be a fly on the wall, have the experience, but not be seen. Um, and so, like in order for me to do my work, I had to work, like that was a big part of my work through is like,
mm,
being comfortable with being seen, because I wanted to just do my work and, like everybody else in the barn last night, hide in the shadows. And so it was kind of fun, like sitting in the front row and being like, "Oh, this is great. We got the best seats," and like, and it didn't occur to me at that point at first, like, and we're also the most visible, right? Like we're the, there's the singer and then there's us,
yeah.
and it years ago, or not, maybe not even that many years ago, I would have been looking for, how do I not sit in the front row? How do I not
Mm,
have to be there? And that piece of, okay, so I'm desiring the experience of the music. I'm desiring wanting to be up close and personal with the singer and have that experience. But my aversion is being seen. My aversion is, being out front. And so looking at all the people in there, they were following, their aversion was really affecting how they experienced what they experienced, because the version of being seen and standing out was right there, and the desire to hear the
yeah.
music was right there. And so, they heard the music from the side,
Got it.
and where the sound's not as good, where they're not as close and personal with it. Um, and it was such an interesting thing, right? Like, what happens when we push into our aversions and go, what is this logical? Is this something that do I want this to keep limiting me? Do I want to feel comfortable sitting in the front row? Do I want to feel comfortable sitting where people can see me so that I can even have a greater experience of the music?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So I mean that's one that's not that type of event may be sort of a symptom because there's
mhm.
not a whole lot of consequence there. Right. I'm still hanging out. I'm in the seats. I'm
It's
having beers
subtle,
with my
right?
buddy. It's totally subtle.
Yeah,
But when you would take that same type of dynamic and apply it to your relationship or your job or what taking risks or whatever it may be,
yeah,
it could play out differently. So how do you have an example, maybe working with a client, if that's a good idea to talk about, or
yeah,
yourself or me in terms of what that looks like and how that can be a little more substantial for folks?
yeah. I mean, my life, I think, is a perfect example of that, right? Like, everything that I did with my work, I wanted to be the guy behind the guy.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? Like, I love having these powerful, influential clients. I get to help them show up
Yeah.
more fully. And when they show up more fully, they have a bigger impact. And I feel like I have a bigger impact. And that's all very true. My version was being seen.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing as what was happening, for most people in that barn where the music was playing. And my desire, though, was to have a big impact, to get my teachings out there, to help people, to shift consciousness. And so, for a long time, my limitation was that aversion.
Hmm.
And at a certain point, when I wanted to start doing more groups, I'm like, well, in order to fill these groups, I need to be seen. Like before, my whole client base was built out of word of mouth, and that's fine for one-to-ones.
Yeah.
But if you want to have a bigger impact, like you got to let people see you. You got to open up. You got to reveal
Yeah.
yourself. And so, like, in order for my business to grow, the only way it was going to happen was for me to work through that and move through that. And I had a big aversion to it, but I could also see that it was that aversion was in the way of what I desired.
Yeah.
And really, what it was in the way of how I needed to show up, like the impact that I'm here to have and the people I'm here to work with. And so I had to work through it and deal with it. Because if I let it just stay the way it was, and that's really what happened, is like I started to get a little bit this feeling of like treading water in my business.
Hmm.
Because I'm like, well, it's great, like it's incredible who I'm getting to work with, but for some reason the fulfillment's falling off now. And it was because I wasn't pushing myself to the next level yet. All of a sudden it started to be less fulfilling, and that's the nature of it.
Yeah.
How's
Yeah.
that how's that land for you, that?
Yeah, no, it lands. I mean, I've seen you do it, and I'm relating to it as you say it. And when you say treading water, my thought is there's either one of two directions. There's forward and there's backwards, and treading water is a slow version of backwards, right? Like we,
Yeah,
we may feel that, but the reality is, if we're treading water for like if we tread water for a day, we're not moving that far backwards. If we
right.
tread water for a year, by the time we realize we tread water, the world sort of changed around us. We haven't kept up.
Yeah,
We
and we
haven't
don't
put it,
feel in touch with our desires. Like we
yeah.
just kind of keep letting them get defaulted into
Yeah.
safety as
Yeah.
opposed to expanded into, you know, and that piece, it's the idea that when we're pushing into our aversions, it's a temporary discomfort, right? Like last night I was sitting there, like it felt good to be sitting there in the front row, and it didn't bother me to be seen,
Mm.
right? Like
Hmm.
the aversion was temporary. Once I worked through it, then all of a sudden it opened up a new window for me and new possibilities. And same thing with my business, right? Like now it's like it feels good when we put out the podcast, when we put out the clips and people are listening. Like I get
Yeah.
excited. Whereas before I was like, oh, people are listening. You know, like, well,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I mean, I relate to everything you're saying. I mean, when I did a little bit of college radio back in the day, and
yeah,
um, like I sort of did it for myself. Like I just
right, right.
enjoyed playing my own music, right, for an hour and a half, and called it a credit. Like that was fun.
Yeah,
Um, and I picked up the phone and asked people to call and all that, but I sort of didn't care.
yeah, yeah.
I just didn't give a shit. It was really my own experience with myself that was more entertaining. But that
Yeah.
only goes so far.
Yeah, and I think too, like when we have something that we're here to bring, right, which all of us
Mm,
do, right? When we try to keep it small like that and just let our aversions, rule the day, it's selfish, We're like we're not real, and whenever we're selfish, whenever we're really stuck in that taking care of ourselves instead of the people around us, like fulfillment's gonna just keep dropping. We're gonna feel smaller. We're gonna feel, um, just like, I mean, the word fulfillment is just what it always boils down to for me. And there's a difference between fulfillment and happy. There's a difference between excited and fulfillment. Fulfillment's like that deep feeling of like purposeful,
yeah.
and how many people, I feel like I saw that a lot when I was living in San Diego, where the weather was beautiful all the time, and people just got so used to it, that it was like it didn't do anything for them.
Yeah.
And then it's funny to come back here to upstate New York where like a nice day is a little bit of a rare occurrence, and people are like, it's like flowers blossoming.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. A little more appreciation for it because it's just not always there.
yeah, yeah. And so we
Yeah.
have to let the next level of ourselves open up. And
Mm.
be in touch with our desires, absolutely, but also going, well, what's my aversions? Because if we don't name our aversions, if we don't get in touch with them, they just default and control us. And we go,
Yeah.
I just didn't feel like doing that. I didn't feel like sitting in those seats. I felt like sitting over in the shadow on the side. Oh, could
Yeah.
you hear there? Yeah, the sound was okay.
Yeah. So I have a couple questions. So how did you feel when you saw those seats open? Were you like, oh shit? Or were you like, cool, front row seats? How did you feel in that
At
moment?
first I was thinking like, well, maybe we'll sit on the side a little bit. And then I'm like, oh, well, like they're right here. Like why? Like it was kind of a funny thing where I felt the initial old impulse to like scan for the side and be like, oh shit,
Yeah.
it's front row seats. Okay, let's, like, this feels good.
Yeah.
And so it, like there was still a part of me that had to go, oh yeah, um, and again work through the initial aversion, but
And
it
did
was
you
still
recognize
small. It was
that
just a
like at
little.
the time? Did you how close were you to catching up to your reaction and being conscious of your reaction as it was happening? Was it next day? Was it the next minute? Like where was that
It was all pretty
tracking?
simultaneously. Like I kind of
Okay.
scanned the room about where to sit. I'm like, oh, there's spots over there. And they're like, oh, well, right here. It was like, but I had to feel like the desire to be smaller and
Yeah.
then the desire to have the full experience.
Got it.
And when I had the
Okay.
desire for the full experience, all of a sudden it was like, boom, right here. Okay, this is it.
Yeah. 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 Okay. And so it seems, let me know if I get this wrong. So it seems like happy is almost a distraction from aversion and fulfillment in some ways. Because
Yeah,
happy is
yeah.
sort of on a scale, and at the top of the scale is complete bliss, like you talked about, and at the bottom of the scale is not happy. And so
Miserable.
like, yeah, like that's sort of on the scale, I
Yeah,
would
yeah,
think.
yeah. And if we don't work through it, like I could have would have been very easy to go find a spot on the side, but if I didn't stay present with it a little bit, like, oh, is there an aversion directing
Yeah.
this versus the desire directing this, and feeling both and going, what do I really want? Like where is my greatest experience here?
Yeah. Yeah. And so then so so like a greater experience can be easily applied to the concert. But then
Yeah.
when we take this framework and apply it to our lives, there's got to be something more than just a greater experience at the concert, right? It's not just better sound.
Yeah,
It sounds like it's purpose driven, or there's something around it. You're
yeah,
talking about
yeah.
dharma. Yeah.
And how often do we even see it in relationships, right? Like, oh, that didn't feel good, but I don't want to address it because addressing it feels worse, right? There's an
Mm,
aversion here. My desire is to have this incredible connective relationship where there's, great communication and we support each other. My aversion is like, I don't like when I
communication.
don't feel good. I don't like
Right.
having conversations that are uncomfortable. And so we just keep defaulting, and then, like the relationship just kind of, like people go to their sides and don't come together. And in order to
Yeah.
create that cohesiveness, that coming together, we have to be really willing to deal with the uncomfortable.
Got it.
And when we're
Got it.
always avoiding the uncomfortable, we end up uncomfortable. It's
Yeah. Yeah. So even though and you said counterintuitive to dive into the aversions, that can raise the happiness level, which feels sort of superficial to me.
yeah, yeah. Because really, what we're looking at raising is the fulfillment level.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's funny, like how often have you felt fulfilled and you're not smiling at the same time? You're just like, oh God,
Right.
wow. You're just like in this depth of like that like I'm so psyched about how that went. And then maybe we think about what that's creating and we start to feel happy, but they're two separate feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always that deep fulfillment is always on
Mm-hmm.
the other side of the aversion. It's always on
Mm-hmm.
the other side of how am I holding myself back? And then when we break through, even if it's a small breakthrough, we feel fulfilled. We go, oh, I feel expanded. There's more room inside here
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. I mean, like,
And I have more. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, like ice cream makes me very happy,
Yeah.
but it doesn't make me feel fulfilled.
No, twofold.
Yeah. Right. Right. It's
The
a very
difference
different
between
thing.
fulfilled and two-filled.
And so I can get that ice cream and have a sugar high and then feel good, and
Yeah,
then it's going to start to slip, and then I can dive back into the ice cream. I could do that
yeah,
all day long.
yeah.
Um,
So, yep, going up and down and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
following
But
that roller coaster.
yeah, but there's a
What people do.
fundamental lack of any amount of fulfillment in that ice cream, unless maybe I made it myself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's a little different,
Right, right.
but I don't.
Yeah, these are for my chickens. I use the eggs from that. If you eat eggs, like,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
this.
yeah.
Yeah,
There's something
absolutely.
more to
There's a
it.
sense of being part of the process.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Pride and purpose versus consuming and
yeah.
growing horizontally.
Yeah, and to me too, it's so much of if we're fighting against things, fulfillment is seldom available too. Like it has so much
Mm,
to do with when we're taking care of the people around us. And that's a really interesting theme. And this could turn into a whole nother episode.
mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
when we focus on ourselves and taking care of ourselves, we get small, we get shrunk, our aversions, rule the day, rule the decision making. We're looking for what makes us feel good right now. But when we focus on taking care of others, our aversions don't show up in the same way. And even our desires don't show up in the same way, but our fulfillment really shows up in a big way. And
Yeah,
so, whether it's in a one-on-one conversation or, whether it's talking to a group, whatever, when our focus is on taking care of the people around us, like that changes everything. Um,
yeah, yeah.
and that's really where fulfillment is. And again, then we get into we can make the formula more complicated and say, well, also self-sacrifice also ruins fulfillment. And so it's like, how do I focus on taking care of others from this aligned place, from this next right action place that isn't about self-sacrifice, that isn't about letting go of what we need for ourselves.
Mm,
And so there's this sweet spot, right? Where yes, the focus is on, taking care of the people around us, but it's also on taking care of ourselves. And where that balance is, is where fulfillment is. It's where our sense of purpose is. It's where our sense of showing up in our power is. And if we let go of that and start moving to self-sacrifice, our power falls off because we feel like we're not taking care of ourselves. We trade it in, we give it away. And so there's a really interesting, um, you know, uh, balance there. And it all comes down to, if we're self-sacrificing, that's a desire usually to be liked, to make everybody comfortable, a desire for
mm-hmm.
people, when we're empathic and we're feeling everybody
Mm-hmm.
else's stuff, it's a desire to be comfortable ourselves. So we're self-sacrificing to make them comfortable. So we're comfortable. There's an aversion to feeling uncomfortable. And so
Mm-hmm.
again, we're playing that same game.
Yeah,
And when
you're
we
just calling it
balance it,
something different. Yeah.
yeah. when we balance it, move into our alignment, that's where the fulfillment's going to be. The right amount of giving, the right amount of receiving.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do goals map into this? Like I'm trying to like when we want to accomplish something,
Yeah.
how does that fit into this framework or does it?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I've heard the expression that says if your goals don't scare the shit out of you, you need to make new goals. Right. And I think that there's a fine line with that too. Like they shouldn't terrify you. They shouldn't shut you down. But the
Yeah.
more we get connected with our relationship with our aversions, the more our goals are going to be like, um, like I have a client who recently, took on a leadership position because she
Mm,
hated being the one that the responsibilities fell on. And
mm,
so she's like, I got to get through this because it locked me down. It keeps me small. It keeps me. And so I'm actually going to
yeah.
sign up to be the president of this thing and have to run it. And everybody's going to look to me. And it's forcing me now to show up in a way that I've been so uncomfortable with. And it's not fun, but it
No.
is very fulfilling because now my
Right.
world, my inner world just got so much bigger because I'm not going around the world trying to not be in charge of things anymore. And so that that piece was, so when we look at goals, are we, what is the goal? Well, maybe my goal is to feel in touch with my power and to feel comfortable in leadership positions. Okay, so well, what do I need to do? Or maybe it's not even that. Maybe it's my goal is to create something that I want to create. Well, that's going to require me to be a leader. That's going to require me
Yeah.
to step up into a place that's really uncomfortable to me. But if I just follow what feels good about that, like, oh, I love it when people listen to me. I love it when people say, oh, good job. I love it when people think I'm smart. Like, well, that's great. And if that's the only thing we're trying to do, we're going to cater to a very specific audience. We're not going to grow. We're not going to
Yeah.
be putting ourselves out where we're going to get the negative feedback that comes with that of really
Right.
expanding yourself. And so it stays small. We tread water. And then we go, God, I don't know why I'm not like, I have this beautiful work. I make my own schedule. Why do I feel unfulfilled? Why do I feel unfulfilled, and now I'm not even, it doesn't even make me happy anymore.
Yeah.
And so like our goals have to have this certain amount of pushing into our edge, because to me I think I always identify it as internal expansiveness. What's making me feel small in here? I don't want to be
Mm,
seen. Well, that's really small. And so I
mm,
got to deal with that shit and figure out a way to put myself in situations where I'm being seen so I can get
mm-hmm,
comfortable. And maybe I'll
mm-hmm.
be really intentional and create safe environments at first, but at a certain point, I got to go, I'm going to be seen by people that are going to push back on me and judge me and say
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And
It's
that's,
messy.
that's the next level of it. And
Yeah. So
then
it can be messy. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I go through that, I experience it, and I get, come to terms with it and go, yeah, this is what this looks like. And then we get
Yeah.
comfortable with it. And then we go, God, my world just got so much bigger. And
Yeah.
now I can
Yeah.
do the things I wanted to do. And now my fulfillment jumps.
Yeah. 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 And you're more capable and you're more responsible and more shit got done.
Yeah.
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 And your
Yeah.
relationship with self, your trust goes way up.
Totally different. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a formula there, you know. And to me, it's like, how did I work through it? For me, it was alignment, right? Like when I go into this
Yeah.
space, I know my next right action.
Mm,
I'm out there in the world. I'm in a world of, I like this and I don't like that, desire and aversion.
yeah.
And it's most of it's blind, and we're just moving through life, keeping ourselves small, keeping ourselves unfulfilled. And when we're willing to, let things open up, the last thing I'll say, I'll just drop this in real quick because I know we're just about out of time. But this saying came through, a channel through in a session not too long ago, and it said, talking with a client, and the question was, are you willing to experience the experiences that you need to have in order to expand in the ways that you need to expand to create what you want? Are you willing to experience experiences that you need to have in order to expand in the ways that you need to in order to create what you want? And like that piece, we're often trying to avoid those expansive experiences because they don't feel good, right? They have
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
break through our limitations. They have to break through what we're afraid of, the ways that we
Yeah.
keep ourselves small. But when we're willing to have those experiences and we've signed up for them, and we go, yeah, I am willing to have this experience that feels like shit because it's going to break something free for me. And that's a huge part of my spirituality, not just having a blissed out experience and going, oh my God, I can feel these high vibrations. Like, yeah, but they're limited by our aversions. And so we got to work through these so that we can have all this expanded space. And once we've done that, that's where the freedom is. That's where the fulfillment is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Super cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Cool conversation, man.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, this feels like this could continue, but
Yeah, it does.
um, again, like take advantage of the free resources. There's several of them in the show notes that
Mm-hmm.
open up this up to you, and that piece for me, like what we're talking about today is outcomes, right? We're going like, wow, when we understand that we need to stop keeping ourselves small if we really want to be fulfilled, and that it's not about just feeling happy right now. It's not just about
Mm-hmm.
smiling. It's about that deep sense of purpose. And when that shows up in us, everything else just pushes back, and our life feels different. We really, our whole relationship with ourselves feels different.
Mm-hmm.
And seeking desire, seeking joy has its place, but it usually, if that's the only thing we're doing, it really messes with our relationship with ourselves, because
Yeah.
we don't feel
Yeah.
useful, we don't feel
Yeah.
fulfilled or meaningful.
Yeah. And we're talking first and foremost about relationship with self, and then
Yeah,
everything else built from there.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Awesome. Well, great conversation, man.
Yeah. Fun. Mm-hmm.
Sweet. All right. Well, love questions on this too. And so as always, we love listener, viewer responses, feedback, pushback, questions.
Any of it, all of it.
Makes it more interesting, more interactive. So get involved. And thanks for listening. Have a great week. We hope you enjoyed listening to today's podcast. And if you did, please subscribe so you can catch the next episode. If you want to learn more about the Aligned Living System and how it could support you in your life, check out davidwaldas.com.